Okay, so kind of a trick if you've already taken the strut out so that there's nothing holding the knuckle and you're trying to get the ball joint loose. You can take your jack and just barely grab the edge of the brake disc and jack it up just so that this is resting on the jack, and essentially the lower control arm is what's like loose and floating. And then when you smack the top of the threads just a couple times, it should just pop right out while this doesn't move. Okay, so we're back under the car. As you can see, I followed pretty much the same steps as before from my previous suspension replacement guide, except this time I took the axle bolt out. When you get it about 90% of the way out, as long as you've still got a few threads in it, when the knuckle is still on the axle, what you can do, since they're single-use bolts anyway for the axle bolt, you can just take I had a ball peen hammer, but really any hammer will probably work. You just want something with a little weight to it. Just hit it right on the head of it and it'll start pushing the axle out of the back of the knuckle. It'll take a few hits to get it start moving, but then all you have to do is, you'll probably still be attached because you want to get this out before you can really get the ball joint out. So you'll get to a point where you just got to fiddle with pulling the knuckle forward to get the axle to push out of the back. And then, as you can see, I've just got it up on my jack right now, just holding it all so that the brake line isn't too tight or anything. It's still pretty loose there. And then I've just got this bungee cord because this keeps wanting to flop over in the way. But yeah, so anyway, to get the lower control arm out, at least for me, it was very simple. It only took like 3 just medium hits right on the head of this when it was still up through the bottom of the knuckle, and it just popped right out. I did spray it with PV Blaster. I pretty much spray every bolt with PV Blaster no matter what, and it always seems to work pretty well. To get the 3 bolts that hold it to the subframe, this one has a welded on threaded nut on the actual subframe, so you don't have to worry about holding down the nut there. I wish it was the same over here, but these two that are pretty hard to see because it's dark in here, there's 2 that hold this bushing on, and it also mounts the sway bar. So there's 2 nuts there. They're 21mm on that end, and the bolt heads from underneath are 18mm. Yeah. So pretty much I upgraded. I'm not only using hand tools now. I do have my hammer drill there. It's not super great, but it's been enough to get everything apart much easier than before. But anyway, so you just come up from the bottom with your 18mm socket or ratchet or whatever you want to use, and then to hold from the top, because there's not much room in there, especially on the back side. If you don't want to take the sort of mid-plate mid-plate piece that's underneath here, so here's the front splash guard up here, and then there's this like mid-plate plastic piece. If you don't want to take that out, what I am using is just a 21mm crow's foot. I didn't actually even put anything on it because when it slid down onto the nut and I started to turn it, it catches on the edge of the metal housing for the bushing. So you can just slide it onto each one and they just pop right off. So then this whole thing just comes right out. You need 6 total of these bolts that go up and hold the lower control arm. Just put some anti-seize on it and some blue Loctite. There was Loctite on the previous one, so I just put some more on there. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all fed up through. So to torque this back down for the lower control arm ball joint, it's a 21mm socket and 74 foot-pounds. And if you get to a point where the center shaft feels like it's spinning, which it might be, Yeah, there's a hold down in the center. Okay, so I was able to torque down the ball joint. I actually did not need to use the hold down. Um, it just had more thread on it than I thought. And now you can see that I've just loosely pushed the axle back into the knuckle. As you can see, there's still a gap here, and that'll get closed up when I start to torque down the new axle bolt. So I put some anti-seize on it, and it comes with blue or red thread locker depending on where you bought it from. This one's got blue. The other one I bought at a different time has red thread lock. So torque spec for it is 26 foot-pounds and then plus 90 degrees on it. And you can see that it pulled the axle back into the knuckle. Okay, so that was a huge pain. I thought what you could try to do was leave the bolts out of the control arm and the subframe, and after you got this in here, you'd be able to just jack up from the outside point. But like people had said online, when these are nice and tight, everything is like under tension, so as you start to raise this up, it just wants to pivot and pull out. So I couldn't ever get any hole to actually line up before the whole thing would just like sort of want to come out, no matter how much I tried to pry and move on it. So what I ended up doing was taking the bolts back out from the subframe and the control arm, pulled the whole thing back out, got the strut out of the way. I actually took it back out so that I could get everything just down and get the control arm pulled away from the frame again, since it's already tight now down at the ball joint. So this was all one unit. And I still have the axle in to help keep everything from just like falling off the car, because it's maybe 50 pounds or something between the knuckle and the control arm. So you can't really hold it and like move it around that easily. Anyway, so then after I got the strut back out of the way, I got the bolts started on the 3 points for the control arm. They're not tight, they're just in there enough to hold it. And then, as you can see, I have my crowbar here, which is still jammed in there pretty good. I'll have to get this taken care of. But I used this prying tool that I got off Amazon, and it's supposed to go down here on the bottom of the control arm to help you push down the control arm, but there wasn't hardly enough room here to get the leverage I needed. So I just put it through the hole where the tie rod goes, and then I just got the other end braced against the subframe, and then I stood on the very end of my crowbar, and that got the control arm just low enough to get it into the bottom of the strut. You got to be careful depending on how loose you have this and what angle it wants to like hang at, because it was jammed up against the very backside where I've got this bolt through, squeezing open the jaw of the knuckle. So it was starting to scrape up on the actual strut itself, but not very much. And then it just popped right in. So now I just got to lower it and wiggle everything into place a little bit, which hopefully I can just do right here and show you. Alright, I finally got it in. It was just annoying. I actually tightened the bolt back through a little bit so it would open up that jaw a little more, and then I sprayed it with a little bit of lube stuff in there, and then I just had to hit it just real quick with my dead blow hammer, just on the knuckle, just a couple hits, and then I used the jack out here on the tie rod connector area so that it would give it a little more of an angle as it started to raise up. And then the whole thing, when I hit it, it finally just popped in and shot up into place. So now I'm going to get the bolt back through and start reattaching the different pieces. And then I will use the jack out here on the control arm again to raise the whole thing until I just start to come off the jack that's holding the car up, so that the suspension over here is fully loaded. And then I can go in and final torque the bolts on the subframe.